Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I have two stories of people I know personally who had kind of a similar disappearance experience on a college campus. They both happened in my freshman year of college. The first time it was a buddy of mine from the dorms. We had all been out partying and stuff. You know, we had been drinking, but all of us were coherent. We weren't like blacked out drunk or anything. And, anyway, we're going back to the dorms at the end of the night, and one of my buddies had his bicycle with him. The rest of us are walking and he's kind of, riding circles around us on his bike. Finally, he takes off once we get to campus. He takes off heading south towards the dorms. So we figured, okay, we're gonna get back to the dorms. He's gonna be there waiting for us. We get back to the dorms and he's not there. So we waited around. We figure maybe he got food or something. And so he doesn't turn up for like an hour, so we start calling him and texting him and stuff, and no response. Finally, he answers the phone after about 2 hours, and all we hear is like super heavy breathing, and we're trying to talk to him, like, hey man, where are you? What's going on? And it's just super heavy breathing, and finally we start hearing him, and it's kind of like mumbling. We can't really make out what he's saying, and then he hangs up the phone. So we went back out and started looking for him around campus and stuff. Nothing. We couldn't find him. So, the next day, he shows up around 1 p.m. He comes back to the dorm and he looks like crap. He's wearing the same clothes as the night before. He looked terrible, and we were like, dude, what happened? He goes, I don't know. I woke up in a field like 6 miles north of campus. The last time we saw him, he was biking south. He winds up 6 miles north. And he's like, yeah, I woke up in a field. My bike is gone. I have no idea what happened, and I just had to walk home. So to this day we have no idea what happened to him. We were all experienced with alcohol and stuff. We knew how to handle our drinks. None of us were blacked out. We were all coherent. Otherwise I would have just figured he was super drunk and had no idea, but we saw him heading south onto campus. I mean, he rode onto campus, which is well lit. There are police officers patrolling, and he winds up far north. So, super weird. Anyways, it gets weirder. About maybe 2 months later, my roommate didn't come home after one night of partying, which was normal for him. He had friends that lived off campus who he would occasionally crash with at night. And so he doesn't come home, and I think, okay, he's just staying with friends. Next day he still hasn't come back. Next morning, I figured, okay, maybe they got breakfast together, they're hanging out or whatever. By the afternoon I'm starting to get weirded out here. Sure enough, a couple of his friends he would have been staying with come knock on my door, and they say, hey man, have you seen so-and-so? And I said, no, I haven't seen him, I thought he was with you guys. Sure enough, they're like, dude, he left the party last night and none of us have seen him. He's not answering his phone. We don't know where he is. Last we heard from him, he posted a video of this. It's Snapchat, where you post short videos of yourself. They're like, he posted a couple of videos of him riding his bike down a big street, just like breathing super heavy. And we're like, what the hell? So finally it turns out, we called the county sheriff thinking we called the hospital. We called the sheriff trying to figure out if they picked him up. Turns out they picked him up about a half-mile away from the field where my other buddy spent the night. They picked him up a half-mile further down the same road driving a golf cart. He lost his bike and somehow wound up on a golf cart. Totally healthy. This was Santa Barbara County, California.
I encountered a reptilian hybrid a few years ago while attending college in Oregon. This individual was extremely manipulative with words and dangerous with its deeds. Once I told him that he was a cold-blooded bastard after he humiliated a friend. He became very angry, staring at me with a hideous glare. He said I would suffer for my disrespect. That night while studying in my dorm room, I was alarmed by a shadowy figure starting to manifest. I am sensitive to energy, so I immediately started to raise the vibration in the room. It quickly dissipated. That startled me, so I was at full alert. Later that night at approximately 2 a.m. I awoke from what I thought was a dream, but alarmed by a grotesque reptilian form on top of my body attempting to choke me. It screeched and wailed, like it was taking great delight in my fear and pain. I struggled and finally threw the fiend off me. As it cowered on the floor glaring at me, I immediately knew it was the individual I had insulted earlier. It thrust itself at me. I reached for my pants on my desk chair in order to retrieve my pocket knife. It was choking me as I pulled the weapon from my pants pocket and toiled to open the blade. I was able to push it off, long enough to slash it across its left arm and upper chest. With a howl of rage, it ran to the wall and disappeared through it. I turned the light on to fully illuminate the room and noticed blood on the knife, bed sheets, and floor. I checked myself to make sure it wasn't my blood. I was awake the rest of the night and ready to strike if I needed to defend myself. I was exhausted in the morning, but made my way to class. I noticed the individual coming out of his dorm room. He had a bandage on his left arm in the same spot where I had cut the reptilian. He noticed me and walked directly to me nose to nose. He glared at me with those evil reptilian eyes. "Watch your back, because this isn't over," he murmured. I walked past him and made my way to class. Later that day, the dorm staff and housing administrators wanted to talk to me. While I talked to one of the dorm staff regarding this individual, the administrator blurted out, "Don't provoke him. It's important that you not cause trouble for him." The dorm staff was obviously terrified of this guy and behaved like his minions. This was startling. That same night I felt wary of a presence watching me. That sense of dread continued for several weeks until I moved off campus to avoid this hostile individual. However, I often notice him and his acquaintances blatantly watching me when I'm on campus and in town. I know that I wasn't the only person affected by this guy, but no one ever dared to discuss it. Many strange things happened as well, including the sudden death of 2 students in that same dorm. No details of those deaths were ever disclosed, just that they died because of medical reasons. I know others are out there who are aware of the reptilians and that there are ways that humanity can use to defend itself against them. I have been fortunate to meet several people who safeguarded themselves and family. These terrible beings are a scourge that we will continue to confront. Be safe.
The following is my account of what I experienced while living in a haunted fraternity house. As the time goes by since I've lived there, my memories of what I experienced are beginning to fade, so I've decided to write down and share everything I remember. The fraternity house stands in the middle of a bunch of factories and warehouses in downtown Cleveland. Its presence is very out of place as it's one of only a few historical houses of its age still standing in the area. When I lived there, it was very run down, holes in the foundation and some of the floors, and just looked like your quintessential haunted house. I haven't done any research, and the history of the house I learned was just hearsay passed down from the fraternity brothers who lived there before me. I've heard that it was once a house of prostitution and a halfway house before the fraternity purchased the property. I've heard of some deaths that occurred on or around the property in the past. I heard that the owner of the halfway house had been murdered in the 3rd floor bathroom, which was converted to a storage closet when I was living there. And there were 2 fraternity brothers who passed away. One who heard a gunshot in the streets outside the house and went out to investigate and was shot himself and died on the front steps. Another was involved in a deadly car crash a few blocks away from the house. I joined the fraternity during my first semester of college with my group of friends I had made and was spending most of my extra time there hanging out and partying on the weekends. By the end of my first year of college, I had planned to move in that summer because of an irresistible opportunity of $75 a month rent for my own room and utilities. I never had a good feeling about the house. From my former experiences growing up in a home with some paranormal activity going on, I believe I developed some extra sense to feel spirits or entities around me, and I can remember these feelings being off the charts when I was in the house. I can remember I had a strange dream premonition before I moved in. In my dream, I was walking up to the house, but it was on a hill not surrounded by concrete streets and buildings, on a stormy night with thunder, lightning, and winds howling around the house. It was full of rats, overflowing. I could see them piled on top of each other through the windows and pouring out from under cracks under the doors and windows. The premonition actually came true, as after I had moved in I had discovered there was a big rodent problem in the house. When I had first moved in, it was the summer before classes had begun, and I had found myself to be alone in the house and completely terrified. I found myself alone there often as I was not from Cleveland but grew up in another city about an hour away. Most of my roommates who were from the Cleveland area were not around on weekends and during college breaks. I'm a musician by trade and spent a lot of time practicing my instrument during college, as much and any time I could. It always kind of bugged me when I would practice and notice someone listening, and I could always tell if someone was looking through the practice room window at the School of Music even if I had my back turned to the door. I guess that sixth sense again tells me someone is there. I can remember the first week I moved in the house during the summer finding myself alone again. I decided to practice in my room at the house instead of walking to school. I can remember as soon as I began playing I could feel like someone was standing right next to me watching. It was very distracting and creepy to the point that I never practiced there again. The first major experience I had next to the constant feeling of a presence watching me and following me around was the first of what I learned later was a lot of poltergeist activity. I was asleep in my loft in my room when I heard a window close to the bed fly open violently. As frightened as I was, I got out of bed to investigate the window. Now I guess if the window was open as its frame was wooden, it's possible due to changing levels of humidity the wooden window frame might expand or contract, causing the window to fall and shut. But it was opened, defying all laws of gravity. This left me afraid and puzzled the rest of the night. This was the beginning of a long time of being very fearful at night, just waiting to see what would happen next. We spent a lot of time with our sister sorority. These girls were at all our events and a number of my frat brothers were dating the girls in that sorority. Around Halloween our fraternity and their sorority would go to dinner and then to a haunted house, you know, the type you walk through and costumed employees jump out and scare you. We would then head back to our house where we would take everyone to the basement, hit all the breaker switches in the electrical box cutting off all power to the house and light some candles and tell ghost stories. After about a half hour it was like the whole house began to shake and we could hear banging on the floor upstairs and pipes rattling in the walls. All the girls ran out the front door screaming that night, leaving us trying to explain away what had made the noises. As I mentioned earlier, I slept in a loft. Each room was rectangular shaped with a raised platform at one end and a small wooden ladder to get up there. There was enough space up there for a twin mattress and a little shelf I put at the head of the bed where an electrical outlet was. It was my habit of plugging my cell phone in the outlet and placing it on the little shelf above my head to charge while I slept. The ladder to get up there was also positioned at the head of the bed. I had just got into bed, plugged my cell phone up and pushed the phone and cord to the back of the shelf. As I'm about to fall asleep, the phone and cord fall off the shelf onto my head. I thought, okay, maybe it wasn't pushed that far back on the shelf. So I put them back up on the shelf again, making sure it was not going to fall again. A little later the phone and cord fell on me again. Okay, now I'm pretty freaked out and I put the phone back on the shelf a third time. That's when I feel a phantom hand grab my shoulder. I slept with my sheets over my head that night in absolute fear. One night we were partying at the house and I had to walk through the kitchen to get to the first floor restroom. There were folding tables set up against one wall of the kitchen for beer pong games, which diverted my path to the restroom right past the entrance to the basement. As I walked past the basement stairs, I felt what I can only describe as a strong wind that came from the basement. This wind was a burst of energy or force that pushed me back and that seemed to pass through me with a strange feeling that had me convinced I passed through a spirit or an entity passed through me. After a lot of hard work, I had won the yearly undergrad concerto competition sponsored by the School of Music and was preparing for the performance that went along with it. I was pulling other music students out of the hallway in the School of Music into my practice room every chance I got to play through my concerto for them to get as much experience as I could performing in front of people. I thought the most judgmental group I could play for was my frat brothers. So after a chapter meeting I got up in front of all of them to play my piece. After I was done and everyone had gone home or back to their rooms, I was standing on top of the front stairs within the view of a large sliding wooden door that closed off the chapter room where our meetings took place. This door was serious, made of solid hardwood and at least 10 feet high and 6 feet across. It was easy to move on the rollers and track to shut it, but when you pushed it open and closed you could feel its weight. As we were standing at the top of the stairs, I was discussing my performance with two of my closest friends in the fraternity when the door violently slammed shut on its own, with enough force that when it hit the end of the track it swung back and halfway shut again. We looked at each other in astonishment. Did you see that? We all seemed to say it to each other at the same time. Now for the dark stuff. The things I don't like talking about. At the time I was really practicing hard and taking lessons with two different professors at the same time. After a dinner at a bar with friends of greasy food and a few cocktails, I was feeling tired and figured if I went to practice I would really not get anything done. Instead of going to the practice room after dinner as was my habit, I decided to go to bed early and wake early to make up for the missed practice time. As it wasn't my usual schedule to go to bed at 7:30 p.m., I found myself trying hard to fall asleep despite the heavy food in my stomach. As I lay there trying to relax, I could hear faint talking, a conversation between two voices coming from inside my room. It was loud enough to distinguish speech patterns from two different voices, but faint enough that I could not make out exactly what they were saying. This continued until I began having images projected into my thoughts. These images were not my own thoughts, I knew that much. They were disturbing to say the least, of intricate geometric pentagram shapes, with a baby in the middle attached to weird umbilical cords going into its mouth, nose, and ears. Very disturbing, and this left me contemplating my own insanity. After I sensed those images, I was convinced I was dealing with something more than just a haunting, something more darker. On a trip home one weekend from Mom's cooking and a free washer and dryer to do my laundry, I decided to take the crucifix which hung in my bedroom through my childhood. I was raised Catholic and figured the crucifix might help protect me if it was hung in my room at the frat house. One day, not long after I hung my crucifix, I returned to my room in the frat house after a long day of classes and practicing, and unlocked my door to find the crucifix I had hung on the wall had been balanced upside down on the tiny nail I used to hang it from. I was astonished and spent the next hour trying to reposition it the way I found it. It was impossible. I placed it back on the nail the right way, and then a few days later it was just gone. Vanished. I never found it again. One night, after some drinking with my friends, I had what you would call some liquid courage. As I laid in bed, I spoke to whatever it was saying in my mind. "Come on, touch me again, I'm not afraid." I made a huge mistake that night. I believe I invited it in somehow. Ever since, and to this day, I have periodic thoughts to hurt people, my friends and family. They are not my thoughts. I'm not a violent person. It's like something tells me to do that. When I feel this, I say a prayer to myself and have never actually gone through with it, but it's there. Always haunting my thoughts, and it's been decades now since this has started. One night I had been getting ready for bed after a long day. I climbed my ladder up to my loft to get some rest, and as soon as I laid down, the lights in my room turned on by themselves. I even heard the light switch click over on its own. I felt aggravated and a little pissed off, more than frightened this time. At this point, I may have gotten used to this type of thing. So I climbed down my ladder, walked across the room and turned off the lights and got back into bed. Again the lights turned on. This time I was really pissed at having to again climb down the ladder and turn off the lights. Standing at the light switch for the third time, I finally spoke out loud to whatever it was and said in a firm voice, "Stop messing with me, I'm tired, leave me alone." The lights stayed off, and I learned a valuable lesson that night. Whatever it was feeding off my fear, and this time I finally stood up for myself. Things got better from then on. The oppressive, heavy feelings I had in my room subsided, and I felt empowered to stand up for myself. One winter it was record-breaking cold, and the wind rolled off Lake Erie and through the Cleveland streets, making it feel like pins pricking any exposed skin. It was painful just to walk to and from school. The ancient boiler heater in the house had broke down, and the space heater I was using did little to warm up my room. A friend I had back in high school had recently moved to Cleveland to attend law school, and after meeting up with him for drinks one night, he invited to put me up on his couch until the heater in the frat house had been repaired. Soon after I started staying on my buddy's couch, I received a strange voicemail on my cell phone. All of this occurred over a decade ago, and the exact details have escaped me over the years. Here is what I remember about the call. It came up as all symbols, number signs, and stars, not an actual phone number. So I ignored it, thinking my phone was malfunctioning or something. Then I noticed there was a voicemail. It was a strange low voice in a tone that sounded electronic, like with a fuss to it, like you would hear from radio static. It said something like, "You'll never get away, or you'll never escape." I played it for my buddy I was staying with, and he said, "Wow, that's freaky, man, someone is messing with you." I knew it wasn't someone messing with me, it was the voice of whatever had been haunting me at the frat house. I eventually graduated and moved to a southern state for grad school. I've had a few weird paranormal experiences since, but nothing like what I experienced while living in the frat house. My experiences there got me interested in all things paranormal. TV shows, books, and podcasts in my quest to understand what it was that was in that house and what caused all my weird and frightful experiences.
A little bit of background. Her particular subcampus of the college she went to was in the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, and had originally been co-located with an Air Force airfield, cadet school, something that ended up closing a long time ago, like pre-60s. So there were quirks to the campus like senior housing being in former officer house, little bungalows, and a lot of abandoned buildings within sight of shiny new classrooms and dorms for the expensive honors engineering program. Apparently a lot of meth use went in on this weird borderlands, but that's not really what this story is about. Be my sister, in college at the campus mentioned above. Her and her friends bored out of their minds, so they do typical college kid things, in addition to weird college stuff. Weird as in one of the kids liked to practicing knife throwing in his dorm room and subsequently put a bunch of holes in the wall and ceiling. I mention this because her and her friends were concerned the kid in question would lose his dorm deposit, and were looking for paint that perfectly matched the dorm walls to cover up the knife throwing holes. Obviously the college doesn't sell its paint colors, so they're having a tough time. I am telling you this because it is important. Moving on to the more normal college activities they did, urban exploring the disused parts of campus. A lot of beat-up bungalows filled with recent beer cans, ashes from fires, etc., college kids and meth. Neither super interesting or super risky. They were definitely told to be careful out there, but they might not have been even technically trespassing, and usually went during the day. One day they notice a low-slung building that, while not quite new, is still definitely newer than the rest of the disused ones. Looks a lot like the current campus buildings and somewhat similar to the student union. But just as abandoned, broken and boarded up windows, a little bit of graffiti on the outside, and also way far off into the borderlands. They get excited and plan a more formal, nighttime expedition. Since they assume something new might be guarded. Try and do a little research, can't find anything on the nameless building, probably because it's nameless. Night falls and they excitedly head off into the meth necropolis, armed with flashlights and maybe B&E tools. Get to the building, just as dead and disused as they left it that afternoon. No signs of any security at all, especially because the doors turn out to be completely unlocked. They enter and find a shockingly clean campus building. It looks like it's regularly cleaned. There's no furniture anywhere, but the hallways are spotless and freshly finished under their flashlight beam. Layout a lot like their student union, large central hallway with what would have been a reception booth. They Scooby-Doo split up, my sister heading forward through the hallway with one group while the other group heads off behind the reception booth. The hallway has glass display cases like you'd expect, empty but also intact. They notice there's none of the otherwise omnipresent lizards scampering around, nor any roaches, nor moths, or anything else that usually thrives where people aren't. Suddenly, there's a terrific burst of electronic static from the wall. Then they hear the voices of the other group through the static. Then they realize it's coming from an intercom on the wall. The other group found an intercom, tried it on a whim, and found it shockingly. It was powered and functional. My sister finds and flips a light switch and the hallway is bathed in fluorescent light. The whole building is powered on. Kind of weird for a totally empty building, but okay. They reunite with the other group, feeling a little bolder now that they're doing it in a lighted building. Turn off the main hallway and enter one of the large rooms. Probably intended to be a dining hall judging by the layout. Still no furniture, some places that looked intended for buffet tables, and a pair of those swinging kitchen doors. Big windows here, so they leave the lights off and move across to the kitchen doors, trying to keep their flashlights from flashing the windows. Beyond the doors, sure enough, there's a kitchen. Actually some furniture, equipment here, a couple ovens, but not a full suite of equipment. Still nothing alive, and it's as spotless as the rest of the building. Kitchen is mostly a dead end apart from a couple doors that look like storage. I can't remember if she told me they looked like walk-in freezer doors or just pantry doors. Let's go with pantries. Anyway, still pretty emboldened, they decide to peek inside one of the door. Opens onto a room lined with empty shelves. But something's wrong with the floor, and they can't figure out what it is. It's like it's raised up a couple inches and seems to eat their flashlight beams, just absolute pitch black. Some of the floor seemed to be resting against the door and fell out when they opened it. They risk flipping on the kitchen light to try and get a better look. The floor is covered in huge black flies. No, not covered, engulfed. My sister said it was literally 3 to 4 inches of flies on top of flies. All dead. They stare for a moment before one of them wordlessly closes the door. None of them want to admit any real fear, but people start making thin excuses about how it's getting late and let's go back and have a little party before bed. These thin excuses are of course greedily accepted, and they start making their way out of the kitchen. The last one out turns the light off before bolting out the swinging doors. Creep back across the dining hall. Back in the central hallway. Reluctantly turn out the lights. The switch is near the center of the building and head for the doors they came in through in the darkness. But one of their flashlights catches a glint off of something, right in the middle of the hallway they came through. 2 paint cans, the metal kind with the handles. Try to remember if they were there before, but nobody wants to think too hard about it. They get closer. The cans have no dust on them. The cans are untouched. The cans are unopened. The cans have big clear labels from University Building Services on them. The labels clearly state dorm wall 2354 or whatever. The paint is the exact paint the knife edgelord needs for his walls. The group holds in the hallway, holding their breath. Usually this would be a moment for hooting and hollering and not believing their good luck, a moment to be recounted as a punchline. Not this time. Finally, the knife edgelord pipes up and claims it's an outdated shade or something. This is obviously bull, but nobody is in any mood to disagree. Leave via the front door, taking every care to walk and not sprint. Nobody looks back as they walk back to their main part of campus. My sister said they didn't really do much exploration of the borderlands that year after this. The knife edgelord ended up cutting out a piece of drywall with a knife and taking it to a paint store to get a custom mix, which he used to cover up the knife holes. They say nobody ever heard from the security deposit again.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.